You know what's worse than a speeding ticket? Being falsely accused of speeding in a neighborhood where the real speed demons wear pastel cardigans and carry HOA clipboards like they're sacred scrolls. The moment I rolled my new car through the iron gates of Parkhaven Estates, I could feel it. Eyeballs locked, whispers exchanged, curtains twitching with suspicion. It didn't matter that I never pushed more than 20 mph. The sight of a McLaren in a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by identical beige sedans and minivans, must have triggered some ancient, unspoken law of suburban conformity. And leading the charge? None other than Margaret Tisdale, the self-declared queen of the HOA, a woman whose power came not from any official badge, but from the sheer volume of unsolicited complaints she submitted per week. It began not with a conversation, not even a passive-aggressive nod, but with a note. A folded piece of paper wedged beneath my windshield like some kind of neighborhood ransom demand. No greeting, no signature, just a warning. Your car is a danger to the tranquility of our community. It's fast, inappropriate, and threatens child safety. You have 2 weeks to remove it or face consequences. The handwriting was bold, erratic, like it had been scrawled in the heat of righteous fury. I stared at the letter, then at the quiet street lined with trimmed hedges and wind chimes. The absurdity hit me so hard, I actually laughed out loud. That car, sleek, elegant, and barely audible, hadn't even revved above a whisper inside the gates. I kept it respectful, always. I knew how neighborhoods like this operated, but clearly someone had already decided I was a threat to the ecosystem of beige Camrys and HOA superiority complexes. What made it worse, hilariously worse, was that Margaret herself was known for treating speed bumps like suggestions and squirrels like enemies of the state. More than once, I'd seen her white Lexus barreling down the lane, one hand on the wheel and the other flailing at a Bluetooth headset. But suddenly, my mere presence was a problem. Apparently, performance engineering was more offensive than her screaming on speakerphone at her internet provider every Tuesday. I filed the note away, mentally and literally. Figured that was the extent of it, an overreaction, a dramatic note from a woman who'd probably been denied entry to one too many country clubs and needed to assert dominance somewhere. But deep down, something about it felt unhinged, like the car wasn't just unwelcome, it was a personal insult. And insults, as I would soon find out, don't go unanswered in Margaret's domain. 15 days passed without incident. The days melted into a rhythm of polite nods from neighbors, sprinkler systems clicking to life, and birdsong. I kept my distance, stayed courteous, avoided confrontation. The car sat quietly in the driveway, a silent monument to everything Margaret resented but couldn't control. And then came the morning that reset everything. The air was cool, crisp with the early scent of spring, the kind that makes you feel like life is in order. I stepped outside, coffee steaming in my hand, ready to take on a lazy weekend. That's when I saw it. My McLaren wasn't just vandalized, it was annihilated. The windshield had been reduced to glittering shards, the tires were flat, shredded into rubber confetti. Long, angry gashes tore across the matte black paint, as if someone had taken a crowbar to it with both hands and no pause for breath. It was savagery, not mischief. Not a teenager's dumb prank. This was personal, deliberate, and done with the kind of rage that simmers when HOA memos don't deliver immediate submission. I just stood there, the warmth of the coffee forgotten, fingers tightening around the mug until they ached. My neighbors began to gather, murmurs rising like smoke. Someone gasped, another covered their mouth, but no one moved closer. No one except Shannon, who approached with hesitant steps and eyes wide with something close to guilt. She didn't even say hello, just lowered her voice and muttered, "I saw Margaret and the landscaping guy out here last night, around your car. Looked like they were doing something. Thought it was weird." Weird, that was what she called it. Weird, like catching your neighbor vacuuming their lawn or wearing socks with sandals. Not criminal, not destructive, just a passing oddity. There's something eerie about watching destruction unfold after the fact. The stillness of the aftermath, the quiet horror of knowing someone stood on your property, took their time, and unleashed fury on something they hated, not because it hurt them, but because it reminded them of everything they could never have. That car didn't break the law, it broke the illusion that everything inside those gates followed Margaret's unwritten script. And when illusions shatter, some people don't pick up the pieces. They reach for a hammer. Margaret Tisdale truly believed she was the final line of defense between suburban bliss and chaos. After all, what greater threat to peace than a parked car that cost more than her entire home and shattered her image of what was acceptable in a homeowners association she ruled like a velvet-gloved tyrant? But her mistake wasn't just the destruction, it was assuming I'd back down, that I'd be so shocked by the damage that I'd pack up, roll out, and leave her free to polish her HOA crown without resistance. What she didn't know, what she couldn't fathom, was that I had been preparing for a different kind of war, a legal one. And unlike Margaret, I had allies that didn't mow lawns or write passive-aggressive newsletters. I had a legal team that practically salivated at open and shut cases built on ego and delusion. It began with the basics: documentation, photos of the carnage, a witness statement from Shannon, who, now fully aware that weird had crossed into felony territory, was more than willing to confirm what she saw. Her initial hesitation dissolved once she realized Margaret had not just gone too far, but had dragged the entire community into her petty vendetta. It wasn't just about my car anymore. It was about power, control, and the limits of unchecked entitlement. My attorney, a calm, precise woman named Felicia Ward, wasted no time. She compiled everything: damage reports, HOA emails, neighborhood testimonies, and printed copies of every baseless accusation Margaret had flung into the community inbox. Each email dripped with hysteria, claims that I was an unlicensed street racer, that my presence endangered children, that my car roared like a lion in heat at all hours. Completely fabricated nonsense designed to incite fear and make me seem like some reckless villain from a bad action film. But this wasn't Hollywood. It was the real world. And in the real world, there are consequences. Margaret, of course, thought herself immune. She strutted around the neighborhood in her sun hat and pearls, like a woman who had just pulled off the heist of the century, still waving at neighbors as if she hadn't committed a felony under the cover of darkness. She even doubled down in private HOA conversations, calling the destruction an unfortunate but necessary intervention. One board member later confessed she'd said, "Sometimes you have to break a few things to fix a community," as if she were a revolutionary and not a bitter retiree with a vendetta and a hammer. When the police came knocking, she answered the door like she was accepting an award, tried to spin the story into a tale of bravery, told them she was defending the moral fiber of the neighborhood, that my car represented a growing threat of disorder and vanity. The officers were polite but unimpressed. She tried playing the child safety card again, claiming that my car tempted kids to speed, that it created a racing culture in a place meant for sidewalk chalk and lemonade stands. It was the kind of logic that blamed spoons for obesity and books for illiteracy, utterly detached from reality. What followed was a flurry of HOA damage control. The board issued a formal apology, unsigned, of course. They claimed Margaret had acted without authorization, and that the HOA does not condone acts of destruction. But there was no denouncement, no suspension, no removal. They were afraid of her. Or maybe just used to her tactics. She'd ruled so long they forgot she could be dethroned. But her arrogance would soon do that for them. Court dates were set, depositions followed. Margaret remained unbothered, or at least she pretended to be. She showed up to the first hearing without a lawyer, dressed like she was attending a garden club brunch with a clipboard full of blurry photos and a firm belief that justice would side with common sense. She made her case with theatrical flair, claimed she had tried everything to get me to remove the car, that the HOA handbook implied such vehicles were not in the spirit of the community. She waved around the rules like scripture, but none of it said what she claimed. I had read it twice. I'd even highlighted the sections she most often misquoted and submitted annotated versions to the court for clarity. Margaret's entire argument boiled down to emotional manipulation, that she felt unsafe, that she believed the car was dangerous, and that she acted for the good of the children. She even called herself a safety advocate, as if destroying private property with a sledgehammer was equivalent to installing a seatbelt. When it was our turn to present, Felicia made no speeches. She let the evidence speak. Photos of the wreckage, screenshots of Margaret's inflammatory emails, a timeline of events, and then undeniable proof of her actions in full, unfiltered glory. The gallery murmured. The judge raised an eyebrow. Even the opposing clerks stared at the screen like they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. There was Margaret, in full suburban regalia, swinging her hammer like she was hosting an HGTV show titled Destruction for Dummies. And when asked, point blank, "Did you destroy the plaintiff's vehicle?" Margaret didn't flinch. She looked the judge dead in the eye and said, "I neutralized it." The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. For a moment it felt like time had paused, like everyone in that room had collectively forgotten how to breathe. Then the judge leaned back, sighed, and made a small note on his pad. The trial could have ended right there. The moment she used the word neutralized, the case was lost, but we weren't done. Felicia continued, calmly and methodically dismantling every single one of Margaret's claims. We presented GPS logs, proving my car had never once exceeded 20 mph within the gates. Noise level charts that showed it was quieter than most sedans. A stack of sworn statements from neighbors attesting to my respectful driving. And then the pièce de résistance, an email Margaret sent just days before the incident, telling the HOA that if they wouldn't act, she would. In court, that's not initiative. That's premeditation. Margaret grew more agitated as the case continued. She objected to everything, my lawyer's tone, the evidence quality, even the courtroom temperature. At one point, she accused the court of being biased against those who care too much. Her speeches became rants. Her confidence began to unravel. By the time closing arguments began, she was a shell of the woman who once barked orders across the neighborhood with unchecked confidence. The judge didn't draw it out. He summarized the facts, called the evidence overwhelming, and declared Margaret Tisdale liable for full damages. That meant a full vehicle replacement at current market value, including upgrades, plus court fees, and a personal fine for harassment. Margaret blinked, lips parted like she was waiting for a punchline. But there wasn't one. That was it. Her crusade had ended not with applause, but with a court ruling and a financial meltdown. And while the paperwork took time, the consequences hit fast. Margaret's reputation crumbled. The HOA board, now fully aware that covering for her meant legal liability, distanced themselves quickly. One member stepped down, another apologized to me in person. Word spread about the ruling. Neighbors started calling the incident the McLaren trial, and suddenly Margaret was no longer the self-assured president, but a cautionary tale in house slippers. Her beloved Lexus disappeared from the driveway. Rumor had it she'd sold it to pay the first chunk of restitution. Her home, once the site of garden parties and wine tastings, went dark. And I waited. Waited for the final transfer. Waited for the delivery confirmation. And when that brand new McLaren pulled into the driveway, matte black with custom red calipers and sleek leather seats embroidered with "Thanks, Margaret" in subtle red stitching, I didn't throw a party. I just sat in it for a while, hands resting on the wheel, thinking about how quickly power shifts when truth enters the picture. Margaret thought she was punishing me. All she really did was fund an upgrade. And somewhere, deep down, I think she knew it. 2 weeks later, right on schedule, the replacement McLaren arrived like a phoenix risen from the ashes of Margaret Tisdale's tantrum. Identical make, identical matte black finish. But this one came with custom details. Vivid red calipers gleamed behind the black alloy wheels. The stitching on the headrests spelled out, "Thanks, Margaret," in smooth, elegant thread. A little personal touch to honor her generosity. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a trophy. A quiet, powerful symbol that justice, true, verifiable justice, had been delivered not in shouting matches or neighborhood gossip, but in cold, calculated court orders and the weight of undeniable truth. The first time I drove it through the neighborhood, I made sure to coast at a comfortable 10 miles per hour, not a whisper above it. I wanted the entire street to hear the silence, to feel the tension. No revs, no showing off. Just a smooth glide past carefully manicured lawns and trembling hydrangeas. As I turned onto Lavender Circle, the very heart of Margaret's little empire, I slowed to a crawl. There she was, standing stiff on her lawn, hose in hand, watering her roses with robotic focus. Her eyes met mine, not with rage or even shame, but something else. Something hollow. It was the kind of stare you'd see in someone who'd just watched the ending of a movie they thought they'd understood, only to realize they were the villain the entire time. Her shoulders didn't move. She didn't wave, didn't blink, just stood there while I passed by, the subtle purr of the engine taunting her like the soft chorus of a final act. The tension between us had shifted completely. She had once seen me as an invader, an affront to her authority. Now, she looked like she was staring at a monument of her own failure. The kind of failure that doesn't just embarrass you, it defines you. The next HOA meeting was packed. For once, the chairs were full. People who usually skipped these monthly snooze fests were suddenly eager to attend. The air buzzed with anticipation, not unlike a courtroom before a high-profile verdict. Margaret arrived late, flanked by two of her long-time supporters, though their expressions were more cautious than confident. She walked in as if nothing had changed, still in her floral blouse and neutral slacks, clipboard in hand like a security blanket. She opened the meeting with her usual formality, calling it to order, outlining the agenda, but it didn't matter. The room had shifted. The power she once commanded wasn't there. The glances exchanged between neighbors were no longer deferential, they were skeptical, even resentful. Halfway through the meeting, a resident named Paul Jacobs raised his hand. Paul wasn't known for speaking much, a retired engineer, quiet, polite, always kept to himself. But that night, he stood, cleared his throat, and said, "I move that we hold a vote of no confidence in the HOA president based on her recent criminal conviction and the financial liability she has caused this community." The room froze. Not because people were shocked. Everyone had been talking about it for weeks, but because someone had finally said it out loud, in public, with no pretense. Margaret's face twitched. She tried to compose herself, saying something about acting in good faith and prioritizing the community's values, but no one was listening. Paul's motion was seconded immediately. Then a third hand went up, then another. Even Shannon, seated in the back row, waved her popcorn bag like a ballot. When the vote was counted, it was unanimous. Not one voice opposed. Margaret Tisdale was officially removed from her role as HOA president. What followed was swift. The board, eager to clean house and distance themselves from Margaret's reign of terror, passed several new bylaws. One of them limited the executive power of the HOA president. Another made destruction of private property by board members an automatic disqualifier for any future positions. It was bureaucratic rebuke, sure, but it was thorough. For the first time in a decade, the HOA felt like a collective again, instead of a kingdom. As for Margaret, she tried to spin her downfall into martyrdom, claimed the court system was biased against neighborhood defenders, that she had only ever acted to protect the children, that her intentions were misunderstood. She even penned a lengthy email to the entire HOA mailing list titled "An Open Letter to the Community I Loved." It read like a manifesto disguised as a farewell speech, long paragraphs about morality, misjudgment, and her fear that suburban values were being replaced with urban flash. She used phrases like high-octane terrorism and referred to my car as a missile with leather seats. It was exhausting. Most people deleted it without reading past the second line. Those who did read it said it was more sad than offensive, a desperate attempt to rewrite the story after the credits had already rolled. Her personal life took a hit too. The financial judgment against her was severe. Replacing the car, covering court fees, paying fines, it all added up to nearly $300,000. That kind of payout doesn't come easy, especially for someone who lived off a pension and had long since retired from her interior decorating side hustle. Her white Lexus vanished within days, likely sold off to cover initial damages. Rumors swirled about a second mortgage. Some whispered that her husband had quietly resigned from the HOA board shortly after the verdict, tired of the drama and no longer willing to defend the indefensible. Others said their landscaper quit without notice, citing irreconcilable differences. And then there was the poodle. Poor thing developed stress-induced alopecia. Whether that's true or just neighborhood gossip, I'll never know. But it wouldn't surprise me. Margaret's chaos had a way of spreading like mildew, quiet, slow, and suffocating. Back at my house, things settled. Peace returned. I installed a new security system, not out of fear, but principle. And as an ironic gesture, I framed Margaret's original complaint letter, the one that started everything, and hung it in my garage, right next to a high-resolution still from the courtroom slideshow of her mid-swing. Sometimes I just sat there, hands behind my head, taking it all in. Not because I was gloating, but because I had lived through the kind of story people whisper about at block parties and BBQs and turned it into something that mattered. This wasn't just about a car, it never was. It was about how easily power can be abused when no one stands up, how someone with a title and a clipboard can start believing they are the law. Margaret thought she could shame me out of the neighborhood. She thought she could bully her worldview into permanence, but all she really did was expose the cracks in her own little empire. The McLaren, now upgraded and glistening under LED garage lights, became more than a mode of transportation. It was a symbol that no matter how many letters you write, how many rules you bend, how many people you intimidate, truth has a funny way of finding the wheel and driving things forward. And justice? Well, sometimes it looks like red calipers and custom leather stitching. Sometimes it sounds like a soft purr down a quiet street. And sometimes it smells like victory warmed by sunlight, parked on the same driveway someone once tried to erase.